Day 985 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as Russia has now reached a staggering 700,000 military personnel losses. How did we get here? How did we get to this numerical milestone? Well, it is fairly straightforward, as Russia had initially designated 190,000 soldiers for the original SMO. That was known as the Professional Russian Army. Then, when that didn't work out, another 360k for the Partial Military Mobilization Call-Up. Also, another 200k prisoners minimum for all of those Russian penal battalions. In fact, Russia even started a female penal battalion in more recent times. Then, as for the conscripts, with a biannual spring and fall drive bringing in 130k conscripts each, which amounts to 260k per year, or up to 780k now, and a resource that Russia continues to use after all this time, even in the face of the Kremlin's own blatantly obvious denials. But on top of all that, we have Russia's own shadow mobilization, which sits at an absolute bare minimum of 350k soldiers, comprising of contract soldier volunteers, various mercenaries or PMCs, plus other contractors specifically sourced from overseas regions including China, Africa, and of course the first from North Korea now as well. Included further in this list is the coerced enlistments of migrant workers that were working inside of Russia, coming from countries like Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, just to name a few. But also in this list, it's the recruitment campaigns that have targeted minority communities like the ethnic groups in Siberia and the Russia's Far East. And by that stage, we reach a figure of almost 1.9 million. Which you might ask, hey Juzzie, that's not 700,000. That's over twice as much. And indeed it is. In fact, Russia's self-reported disability pensions skyrocketed all of a sudden to have a year-on-year increase of about 800,000 adult Russian male additional recipients. Keyword there is additional. And that's just for the last reporting year, with no explanations given as to why. Very suspicious. Add to that, Russia is currently experiencing its most severe labor shortage crisis in history, with an unprecedented labor deficit of over 5 million workers now. So when we put these figures into context with the Russian losses seen here, we find that this 700,000 milestone likely doesn't at all include Russia's wounded in action, which would be a very separate figure. There's also a good possibility that this is a conservative figure estimate, given other metrics not even considered yet, including that of the little spoken about noticeable decrease in the presence of adult males in Russia's illegally annexed Luhansk and Donetsk regions. Where did they all go? We rarely see many or any. Were they mostly all patriotic Donbass separatists, overly eager to take up arms all of a sudden and leave their families? Or were they forcibly conscripted? The truth is, there's just extremely limited data accessible or even recorded on this metric. But we can reasonably surmise out of all of these metrics that Russia's thirst for manpower is unquenchable, short of a fully fledged and unpopular full mobilization call-up within Russia, with the manpower inherently unsustainable in its current approach, and not just by the pure numbers, but also for the supporting and equipping of their manpower, alongside their wider war efforts, off the back of a dangerously overheated Russian economy. Which, by the way, is overheated directly as a result of this special military operation. Then headed across to the map today, and first to Russia's Kursk Oblast, and taking a look at the shenanigans found between Russian and Korean soldiers. Because, reportedly, this captured Russian soldier described the communication missteps found between his unit and the newly arrived Korean soldiers, where he goes on to explain that during an assault, for some reason, the Korean soldiers were effectively facing the wrong direction and shooting at the Russian soldiers instead, all as part of a friendly fire incident. Apparently, the Russian soldiers tried to explain where to aim, but was somewhat lost in translation, leading to 2 Russian soldiers getting shot by the Koreans. But the event wasn't over, at least not at that moment in time for this Russian soldier, as, fearing for his life, he considered it was better to surrender to the AFU instead of getting shot. Best decision of his life. Followed by a nice warm meal in the evening and a comfortable bed. So these 10 North Koreans that he spoke about were said to be men in a trench, evidently lacking in communication skills and perhaps lacked being equipped with a compass in a foreign land, and very likely a lack of sufficient training, which led them to have no idea which direction they should be firing in. Golly. Just imagine 100,000 more of these Korean soldiers in Kursk, because they're not your typical educated and multilingual Europeans, right? It's back to basics for these guys. Seems like more effort than it's worth so far. Then more specifically in Kursk, with not a great deal of movements on the contact point lines, if at all, but as far as the eastern front goes, Russian recon drones were flying, followed by Ukraine's 11th National Guard coming in to intercept no less than 3 Russian drones. Then also in Kursk, Ukrainian soldiers from the 95th Separate Airborne Assault Brigade destroyed a Russian vehicle some 2 kilometers north of the northern front lines. It was hard to get a make on the vehicle, but it was said to be a Russian Tiger MRAP, and fair to say it was loaded with ammunition. Then headed down to the Ukrainian map today and into the Toretsk sector, where Russian two-wheel army motorcycle troops were hit by FPVs of the AFU's 28th Mechanized Brigade near Shumi. Now, when we insert the coordinates for this location, which I'll do now, there we go. It can be seen that this location is 6 kilometers east of the front lines, at least as far as Toretsk is concerned, though the AFU drones were likely launched from even further afield. Then further south we move, as there is a great deal of activity in the Kharkova direction, with the example of this destroyed BMP-3 in the region's southeast, near Katarinivka. On closer inspection, you'll also notice that the turret was, well, it popped off, but also another motorbike, presumably abandoned, a tiny little motorbike, previously operating as some sort of light scout detachment, although it was clearly operating in far too close a proximity to the Russian BMP, likely meaning that it was probably using the infantry fighting vehicle as a means to cover its own behind from Ukrainian fire. Then also on this axis, there was a Russian deployed and destroyed turtle tank seen in its attempts to cross a bridge. Although there's a mistaken force of habit with my word in there. This actually isn't a tank, it's an MTLB armored fighting vehicle, which has traditionally been a less common vehicle and shed-infused monstrosity that comes courtesy of the Russian army, with these designs most commonly focusing on tougher vehicles like that of tanks as a means to aid in frontline breakthrough attempts, which therefore may suggest that the Russian army doesn't receive enough of the armored vehicles they prefer for their assault operations. Having said that, Russian MTLBs are not out of the woods either, with recent analysis showing that Russia has hit peak MTLB alongside BMPs and peak T-62 and T-80 main battle tanks. But more on that on a later video soon. Then headed way north to touch base on the Kupiansk direction somewhat briefly, where the relatively unchanged front lines on this axis of attack lead to little updates to speak of, as currently Russia continues to meet a lot of resistance north and south of the Oskol River, at the locations of Krylikivka and Kolesnikivka. But this is where the real battles for Russia should begin now, as they would start to look to achieve an expansion of in the north and the south, into all of the Ukrainian-controlled territory, more specifically the Ukrainian liberated territory, hence all of the green overlay. Meaning that Russia's objective here is to take or attempt to take this land a second time. And though Russia might be seeking to further expand or consolidate their bridgehead to the Oskol River, the whole region here makes it feel like the Russian army's approach mostly circled around efforts to reach the Oskol River, via expending so many mechanized assault waves. followed by their expectation that Phase 2 of their operations in the region, to take the territory beyond, would be a plan that would somehow reveal itself to their army once they reached the river. Though it's not as easy as it looks. Then headed around the map and taking a look at a few things here. So the soothing visuals of more intercepted Russian reconnaissance UAVs, 5 Zalas and 2 super camps, happening all in the Donetsk region. Then also, somewhere on the map, a Russian soldier of the Kadyrov Akhmat forces variety, the TikTok army, gets the Darwin Award for trying to intercept a Ukrainian FPV drone using an RPG. An unconventional and highly imprecise method of air defense. Then also, somewhere in the east, we saw a Russian soldier showing the aftermath of a Ukrainian FPV kamikaze drone hitting a Russian fuel tanker based on a KAMAZ 501. Then lastly, I'll mention in the east, back to the basics, we saw the destruction of a Russian field ammunition cache. Then to head across to some news for today, so starting off with a Ukrainian-produced missile update, as Ukraine has completed development of the new Grom-2 ballistic missile, and now preparing to deploy the Grom-2, which is capable of reaching targets up to 500 kilometers or 310 miles away, representing a significant leap in its defense arsenal. This deployment could enable Ukraine to weaken Russian military capabilities in occupied regions, but also threaten key military sites within Russia. So this is quite the step up in capability for the AFU, as it would force Russian military assets inside of Russia, be they depots, military airfields, and so on, which would start to feel the pressing need to pull back even further. So it's surely set to raise some eyebrows in the Kremlin. Then to some more Ukrainian hardware updates, as promised months ago, Rinmetal, a leading German arms manufacturer, has officially opened its first plant in Ukraine. The plant will service not only infantry fighting vehicles, but also main battle tanks. Also, what will follow this, Rinmetal plans to launch production of ammunition and air defense systems in Ukraine too. Then headed to some Russian economy news, as the Russian State Duma has proposed a raffling off of cars and apartments to increase the birth rate. Now, maybe if they gave everybody an apartment, that could make a small difference, but a lottery for a car or an apartment, and just as a proposal, probably won't get them too far. And yet they keep at it, looking for ways to increase their declining population size. Once upon a time, there was even a suggestion that female inmates should get conception vacations. So all of these initiatives, or mostly suggestions, likely come from President for Life, Putin, who plans to be in power, of course for the rest of his life, probably another 15 or 20 years, if he can swing it, as he looks to not only fix the economy with an expanding population size, but also to receive a future generation of soldiers to fight for him. Then to some more news, and according to South Korean intelligence, in return for sending troops to Russia, the Kim regime and the Russian Federation have agreed on direct Russian military involvement on the Korean peninsula in the case of the resumption of the Korean War. But how they would support a war of that magnitude so far away, well, it's got me. It's unlikely to be more than just words. Now, additionally, North Korea will be receiving 700,000 tons of rice annually by the Russian state, as well as reports of each North Korean soldier sent to fight for Russia would be paid a monthly wage worth around $2,000 US. I'm quite sure they won't see any of that money. Sure, it breaks numerous international laws as it relates to arms trade and military cooperation with North Korea, but the upcoming failure to actually get North Korean soldiers paid anything for fighting in Russia's war, well, perhaps Putin might feel he can get all of these international law violations reduced down to a simple misdemeanor. Then headed across to a quick Russian military mobilization blunder segment. So here we go, 17 Russian soldiers refused deployment, citing their hepatitis C diagnosis, which they argued could spread and endanger others within the Russian military. They also showed an order signed by President Putin saying that hepatitis C diagnosis individuals are not fit for military service, making it illegal. But it doesn't matter, because this is Russia. There's very little in the way of requirements for health and fitness when determining if you can or cannot go to the SMO. And like I said at the start of the video, Russia needs all the manpower they can get. Then headed across to a quick funny to round it all off for today, guys. So the latest Russian Blatmobile, based on a 2005 Russian Gaz Volga. This one includes the rare chicken wire roof luggage rack with stealthy trimmed leaf top. Ladies and gents, the self-proclaimed world's most modernized army, checkmate Westoids. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. It was an all-around quicker video today, but I really appreciate you sticking around, you watching, you send in likes, comments, and the support, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!